Welcome to Life Empowers with Melissa Ohden. Where there is life, there is hope. Where there is life, there's a place for love to grow, and love emboldens and strengthens. Where there is life, there's an opportunity to grow and be empowered. I'm living testament to that, and you are too. And if you don't yet feel like your life is testament to this, don't despair and don't stop listening to this podcast. This is exactly why I'm doing it. Thanks for joining me this week as we delve into so many life-affirming topics. Hey everyone, I am thrilled to be joining you for another episode of Life Empowers. You know, I had to make the transition recently to having one podcast episode a month, really focusing on the story of abortion survivors. I think that's an important, I don't want to say gap, but it's a place in information and really podcasts to be putting out that information regularly that, you know, I felt like me in particular, you know, I was called to fill that gap and share those stories as the founder and the leader of the Abortion Survivors Network. And, you know, it's been such a blessing to be able to really drill down into those stories and share so many powerful survivor stories with you. It's been an interesting time, to say the least. We've had so much going on at the Abortion Survivors Network. And I think one of my greatest joys, honestly, has been seeing other abortion survivors do interviews with other abortion survivors. We talk about that a lot in our community, you know, what opportunities we're creating as an organization and as a community to offer a space and a place in our culture for abortion survivors to be seen and heard and acknowledged. And it's just so cool, so cool for me to see and hear abortion survivors, you know, starting their own podcasts or, you know, doing Facebook Lives and hosting their fellow survivors as guests. And honestly, you guys, when you see that happening, I want you to understand what a huge win that is for our culture and for our community of survivors and for, you know, each survivor individually. That's how we change the culture, is by creating connections to one another. And then when we are empowered and healed to share our stories, then be given an opportunity to do so. And honestly, some of those survivors who are out there now starting to share their story are people who, you know, months ago were saying, oh, I'm never going to share my story, right? This is private. I don't feel like I'm led to share my story. And of course, everybody's experience is different, but I love that when survivors do find healing, they do find community, they're empowered with the skills that we equip them with through the Abortion Survivors Network, they're very quickly moved into a place where they feel like maybe, just maybe, they can share their story. So today I want to really highlight some of those places where you can start to see survivors speaking more and sharing their stories. And I also want to highlight our Survivor of the Month for May. So let me just start. I think I'll start in reverse. So let me start today by telling you about the Survivor of the Month for May that we're highlighting through the Abortion Survivors Network. The survivor that we're highlighting this month through the Abortion Survivors Network is someone who blesses us so much day in and day out with not only who she is, but her experience. Denisha Werkheiser is the healing coordinator for the Abortion Survivors Network. And I would have had Denisha on as a guest, but I'm going to be really honest with you all. This is where that piece comes in about survivors hosting other survivors in their podcasts. So Denisha has her own podcast, And I want you to head on over to, your favorite podcast platform and check out Reclaimed Story. Reclaimed Story. See, and now I'm stumbling over it, but Reclaimed Story is Denisha's podcast. I absolutely love listening to it. Denisha has, I've told her she has one of the most soothing voices of anyone I've ever known. But Denisha also covers really just impactful, relatable topics that I think so many of us can recognize in our own lives. And the focus really at Reclaimed Story is reclaiming your past so that you can enjoy and live your most abundant future. And, isn't that a powerful statement and message? We all have parts in our past, those chapters we wish we could erase, edit. We all have those pieces. And sometimes those very pieces, we think we can deny them away. We can just keep pushing forward, avoid tackling them. We think we're just moving on. And what we have to do is heal those broken pieces before we can fully move forward for our future. And that's a lot of the work that Reclaimed Story is doing with women is, helping them heal from that past and recognize that Christ is the healer in the midst of that. And he wants an abundant life for each and every one of us. So, be sure to check out Denisha over at Reclaimed Story for her podcast on all of your favorite platforms. But also you can visit their Facebook page, and that's Reclaimed Story. And you can also visit their website. They have incredible, stories of transformation, beautiful jewelry, just exciting things. And, not only does Denisha have her own podcast, but she was recently a guest on Claire Colwell's podcast called To Be Bold. And since they just did that interview, yeah, I didn't plan this very well, did I? We can just say God planned it well, and we're working with it. But since she was just on Claire's podcast, I thought I would change things up a little bit and highlight a little bit of her story, point you in the direction of Claire and Denisha's podcast. So it's on Claire's platform, and it's also on Denisha's over at Reclaimed Story. And so, that's why I wanted to mix things up a little bit and share a little bit of Denisha's story, but not have her as a guest, because their interview is powerful, and that'll give you the opportunity to check out those two resources. But, a little bit about Denisha, I got to think when I first got to know her, probably was, in 2019, maybe mid-year. And Denisha is one of those survivors who has had a very different experience than me. I found out that I had survived that failed abortion at the age of 14. Denisha did not find out until a couple of years ago. So she was in her 40s when she found out that she had survived. And when Denisha shares the story, I'm not gonna take away all of her story. When you listen to her chat with Claire, it's incredible how the story came out. But what I can tell you is she survived 2 chemical abortion attempts. So the chemical abortion, the pill, was being offered long before I think most of us were really talking about it or understanding it. And I hear that quite frequently in our survivor population. So there were abortion pills, sometimes off market, sometimes given through their medical doctor in office. And this was in the 60s and the 70s. And so we have survivors who were surviving the chemical abortion pill decades ago, like so long ago. And we also have survivors who their parents regretted it, a lot like that pattern we see today. And so, yes, we have survivors in their 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s who survived chemical abortion pills. We also have survivors who survived the chemical pill and then their parents regretted it and were offered progesterone. So that's that pattern that we see still today with the abortion pill reversal. And I think it's really important that we talk about that because, if you follow it in the media, mainstream culture that pushes the abortion agenda, they argue so frequently about progesterone and whether it's something that is scientifically sound. But we know that we see progesterone given during miscarriage, right, to try to prevent miscarriage or when women have an imbalance, and so they're trying to keep that pregnancy and sustain the life of that child. And obviously this has been happening for, again, decades, so this is not new. So Denisha's experience, even though it was new to her to find out in her 40s, this is a set of circumstances that we see pretty frequently in our survivor community. So, here she was in her 40s when she finally found out her story. She had survived chemical abortion attempts. When her mom found out that she was still pregnant with her all those years ago, she went and had a D&C abortion. And again, we see this pattern that's played out in survivors and families' lives too. Her mom went and had that D&C and was told that it had been quote unquote successful, right? That would mean that the child's life was successfully ended through that D&C. And months later, she realized she was still pregnant. Laws back then protected Denisha. She was then too far along to go and have another abortion. I think it's important that we acknowledge that too. When we have those arguments, even in the pro-life movement, about what kind of legislation is necessary or impactful for saving lives, the reality is many survivors were saved after one or more abortion attempts. And, they were saved because when someone would counsel for yet another abortion, their mother was then too far along in the pregnancy to have it. I would love for us in the pro-life movement, one of the things I have a heart for and I'm really starting to focus in on is, the support for women like Denisha's mom, moms like my birth mother, Ruth. Support for women after an abortion has failed. Yes, we need policy to save lives until our culture catches up with the fact that every human being is more than a choice, and abortion is not a panacea for any problems people are facing in their lives. But, I think we also need to do more to support women when their abortion has failed or then they're too far along to have an abortion. There's crisis still there, folks, right? There's emotional trauma, upset. Yes, it's a miracle. So many women obviously are grateful, and men too, that their child is still alive. But I think we have to recognize that there's a lot of crisis that still happens in the lives of women and men and families after an abortion has failed. And that child will then be carried to term. They were expecting something very different for months. And so that's really part of my heart, part of our long-term vision at the Abortion Survivors Network is to, really continue to increase our services and our resources and collaborate with partners to make sure that we're meeting the needs of women like Denisha's mom, who was prepared for something very different for many, many months. So that's Denisha. She survived those attempts. in 1975, born in 1976. And Denisha is just one of the most encouraging, positive, inspirational people I've been blessed to have in my life. As I'm recording this podcast, we're starting to introduce more of our team at the Abortion Survivors Network. And you can visit our social media sites. You can find us as, at the Abortion Survivors Network. We have this great team from, our connections coordinator, Kara West, who is a licensed clinical social worker who is really going to make sure we're welcoming survivors and families with open arms, that we understand their needs and their strengths, and we fully get them engaged in our community and plugged into all of our programs to the best of our abilities. But we have Kara, who's on our team now. I've been announcing that Priscilla Hurley is one of our community support specialists. You've seen Priscilla a couple of times over the last year doing interviews with me. Her story is so powerful. I've also been introducing Josiah Presley. Josiah is a survivor many of you have seen me with. Josiah is now coming on board to assist with meeting the needs of men in our community. We are hearing from more and more male survivors, and we know there are some unique needs and strengths in those men's lives. In a culture that says, failed abortions don't happen, survivors don't exist, then you add on that additional layer that says, and men also don't have any say. There's a lot of needs and a lot of strengths. And so we have this team that is forming at the Abortion Survivors Network, and Denisha has been the cornerstone of this team that we are building. I hope you have the great opportunity to follow Denisha more on social media through the Abortion Survivors Network and through Reclaim Story. And you have the opportunity to sit down and listen to her podcast, either through the Reclaim Story platform or through Claire's platform at Call to Be Bold, because she has such a beautiful message about love and forgiveness. Denisha's mom passed away a very long time ago, and I know Denisha's heart is for her mom to know that she is loved and forgiven. And that's the message she's passing along to women still today. Denisha has a heart to heal everyone who's impacted by abortion. Survivors, yes, but also women and men. And as a former pastor, I know Denisha is just deeply passionate about getting into our church and having more conversations about abortion and about healing and, boldly proclaiming the gospel. I mean, that's what it's about. And so I hope that you have the great opportunity to follow us more on social media this month and get to know more about Denisha and the incredible work that she is doing. I hope you do check out Claire Colwell's podcast, Call to Be Bold. She did just release her first book called Survivor. If you didn't have a chance to check it out, I really encourage you to. You might actually, see the names of some other abortion survivors in her book and read a little bit about us and the Abortion Survivors Network in the resources section. So really powerful things happening. But I want to revisit that discussion that I had at the beginning of this podcast about other survivors really starting to share the stories of other abortion survivors and, through their various platforms and networks. For me, I love everything that I do. I mean, I do. I hope that doesn't sound cliche. Somebody asked me recently, what part of your work do you love? I love it all, every last bit of it. But I really love to see our survivor community getting to know one another, knowing they're not alone, supporting one another, cheering one another on, and then creating those opportunities with one another. our culture for so long has denied that survivors exist. And, even in the pro-life movement, even though people knew that we were out there, it's kind of like, how do you ever begin to find our population? Like, do you put an ad out? I mean, how do you find one another in a world that says you don't exist? And so it's incredible to see the number of survivors reaching out to us that we've seen. It's 20 survivors so far this year, you guys. This is only May. Last year, we heard from 27 survivors new to us in the entire year. So I think this is indicative of what's going to happen as we're successful with our efforts to get the word out that we exist, and that all of you then are getting the word out that not only do survivors exist, but there's an organization that supports them, heals them, empowers them, equips them. It's just so cool. But for me, I am just so always so filled with hope when I see survivors working with one another and sharing one another's stories, because I think there's nothing more that the abortion lobby and industry would love more than for the rest of the world to think that there must be just, one or two of us. Like, I've gotten the essentially, pat on the head when I've been before Congress before. It's like, oh, isn't she cute? Melissa, we're not going to change laws just because you survived. Thank you, but no thank you. There are likely tens of thousands of us, and I know I am called to find them, to heal them, to let them know they're not alone, to give them the skills that it might take for them to feel like they can have a voice however they feel called to use it. And so that's why it's so powerful to see survivors sharing one another's stories, because we can't leave it in the hands of our culture to do it. They can silence, they can marginalize, they can shame the handful of us that they're aware of, but they cannot stop the momentum that is building. And, when you go after one of us, now you're going to be going after all of us. And I'm excited about the opportunities we're creating. There's some great conversations we're going to have over the next few months about what we're working on. But, I am just so thrilled about what survivors are doing together. And trust me, this is just the beginning of what you're going to see us doing. But I want to give you the opportunity to know some places where you can go to experience survivors working together, sharing one another's stories through their own platforms. So Robin Sertel, Robin's been a guest in the past. Robin Sertel has her own ministry, and so it's Robin Sertel, Sertell Ministries. You can go on Facebook. I also believe she's on Instagram. Sorry, Robin, I don't have that note in front of me, but I'm pretty sure she's on Instagram too. I need to follow her. I'll join you in following her. How's that sound? But you can find Robin on Facebook. I'm pretty sure on Instagram. She has a website. She has a book, Miracles in the Wilderness. And Robin has been interviewing people, and she does have a YouTube channel too, Robin Sertel Ministries. But she's been just interviewing valued voices for life. That's the title of those interviews she's having. And you can visit her social media, her YouTube channel, and you can find a number of abortion survivors that she is interviewing. So I know very soon she'll be interviewing my friend Jennifer Milbourne, which we've shared Jen's story before. She's just incredible. But I know Robin's interviewed Priscilla recently. She interviewed, oh gosh, the name escapes me right now, Robin. I can see it. Oh, it was Carrie. She interviewed Carrie Fisher also. And those are just a handful of the interviews she's done recently. So you can find survivors sharing the stories and creating a platform through their own ministries at Robbins Hertel Ministries. Of course, Reclaim Story with Denisha Werkeiser, as I shared before. Also, Claire Colwell, the Call to Be Bold podcast. Right before Claire's book Survivor was released recently, she did a kind of mini, I don't know what we would call it, a mini season where she interviewed a number of abortion survivors, like Jennifer, Denisha, Josiah, myself, sat down and, did interviews with us. So you can even check out an interview that I did with Claire recently over at the Call to Be Bold podcast. That's another great platform for you to see survivors giving a voice and using their voice to raise the voices of fellow survivors. So those are a couple of places. Jennifer Milbourne, has been out there speaking before the pandemic hit. And so Jen tends to share stories on her social media. Jennifer's last name is spelled Milbourn. So it's Jennifer Milbourne, vacuum aspiration survivor. Carrie Fisher does such a beautiful job of encouraging people on her social media and shares many of the posts of other abortion survivors. So those are a few places. Oh, and you know what? Now that I'm still talking about it, Debbie Bennett has a site. Debbie does work with women who have experienced abortion. Debbie has a lot of different experiences when it comes to abortion. And so Debbie also has a podcast or a video blog, I guess you would say. So Debbie is Debbie. The last name is Bennett, Bennett. So those are just a few of the places and the people who you can find sharing the messages of fellow survivors. And Robin is actually being announced. We've announced it, I guess I can say that. She's not being announced. She has been announced as the education coordinator for the Abortion Survivors Network, which just means Robin is putting her incredible gifts into action. Robin is a gifted speaker, an educator, has just a powerful healing ministry. But I've just been so impressed, and so has our survivor community, with her skills when it comes to educating and equipping people. And so she will be making sure that we are offering the highest quality programming that equips survivors in areas like, public speaking, writing out their testimony, being an effective communicator all around. It doesn't mean that you have to take a stage. It just means having, communication skills, even on a one-on-one conversation basis, how to set up a Facebook page, maybe how to start a podcast, how to write a book, all of those skills that so many survivors want to have and have never had anyone come alongside them to help them have those skills. So I suspect you are going to see more and more podcasts, Facebook pages, vlogs and blogs coming out from abortion survivors as we continue to increase those offerings, and Robin really pours into the survivors that we serve. So that's a little bit about catching up about where we're at. Isn't it exciting? So Claire was our Survivor of the Month in April through the Abortion Survivors Network. Denisha is our Survivor of the Month in May. And we have this incredible opportunity happening where so many survivors are providing not only, emotional support and social support to one another, but they're now creating these platforms sharing one another's story. They're essentially putting me out of business, you guys. I mean, yes and no. I'll always find something to talk about. And I wouldn't have it any other way, really. This is a sign that I am doing what I'm called to do. They're creating those connections that they wouldn't have had otherwise. They're developing the skills, and they're finding that they're empowered to go out there and do this. So that just means that I'm going to maybe be able to transition back to having other guests on the show in addition to highlighting abortion survivors when they're out there, doing it already themselves. So be sure to check out so many other platforms to hear more of Denisha's story this month, to go back and revisit my conversation with Claire. Be sure to check out the social media and the podcasts and the YouTube channels of the other abortion survivors that I've talked about today. This is a sign that we're making a difference. You and me, all of us. Something is happening. I hope you feel it shifting. This is what happens when survivors are empowered. Life empowered our survivors. They just need our support, our resources, our belief in them, opportunities that our culture has denied for far too long. Life empowers, friends. Thanks for joining me this week on Life Empowers. I hope you found our time together to be life-affirming, hope-building, encouraging, informative. And remember, the next time someone states that abortion is empowering, you know better. Life empowers. See you again next week.